I stood up to thank my grandma for a cute $500, and she stared blankly. Then she stated, calm as ice, that she had wired me $1 million. My mom laughed too fast. My brother choked. Grandma whispered, asking who stole it from me at her table. The scariest part was not the missing money. It was that someone had planned the perfect lie, and Christmas dinner was their stage. My name is Harper Watson. And if there is one thing my decade at Summit Ridge Risk and Compliance in Boise has taught me, it is that the truth usually hides in the silence between two heartbeats. I am 34 years old, and I spend my days dissecting financial fraud, hunting for the digital fingerprints of greed. I trace wire transfers through shell companies and analyze the behavioral patterns of embezzlers who think they are smarter than the system. But nothing in my professional career, not a single case of corporate malfeasance or identity theft, could have prepared me for the stillness that descended upon my grandmother's dining room table in Wilmington, North Carolina, on Christmas Eve. The air inside the house was thick with the scent of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and the cloying sweetness of my mother's signature yam casserole. It was a perfect, suffocating tableau of the American holiday. The chandelier above us cast a warm, golden glow on the good china. The set my grandmother, Dorothy Klein, only brought out when she wanted to prove that this family was still whole. We were all there, playing our assigned roles. There was my mother, Janine, wearing a red velvet dress that was perhaps a bit too bright for the occasion, her laughter ringing out a fraction of a second too early at every joke. Beside her sat my stepfather, Harold, a man who had mastered the art of blending into the wallpaper, chewing his food with a rhythmic, bovine indifference. Across from me sat my brother, Caleb, and his fiancée, Nolan Sutter. They were the golden couple, radiating a curated image of success and domestic bliss, though I had noticed Caleb refilling his wineglass 3 times within the first hour. And then there was Grandma Dorothy, at 81. She sat at the head of the table, a position she had held since my grandfather passed. She looked frail this year. Her hands, usually so steady when she knitted or gardened, had a slight tremor as she manipulated her silverware, but her eyes were the same clear, sharp, and unmistakably intelligent. She had always been the anchor, the one person in this chaotic orbit who made sense to me. I had flown in from Idaho that morning, exhausted but determined to play the part of the dutiful granddaughter. Earlier that evening, amidst the tearing of wrapping paper and the feigned surprise of gift exchanges, Grandma had handed me a small envelope. Inside was a check made out to me for $500. It was a sweet, traditional gesture. It was gas money, as she used to call it. Even though I had flown, it was safe. It was normal, or so I thought. I decided it was time to make the requisite toast. I tapped my spoon against the rim of my crystal wine glass. The sharp ting cut through the low murmur of conversation. I just want to say something, I began, standing up. The chair legs scraped softly against the hardwood floor. It is so good to be back in Wilmington. I know I am stuck out in Boise most of the time, but I really appreciate everyone being here. I turned my gaze to the head of the table, and especially to Grandma. Thank you for the dinner. It is delicious as always. And thank you for the Christmas gift. The $500 was too generous, and you really did not have to do that. I smiled, raising my glass, expecting the usual chorus of "hear, hear," or a dismissive wave of her hand, but the room did not respond. Grandma Dorothy was in the middle of slicing a piece of turkey breast. As the words $500 left my mouth, her hand froze. It was not a casual pause. It was a total cessation of motor function. The knife stopped mid-saw. Her shoulders stiffened, locking into a rigid line. She did not look at her plate. She did not look at the food. She slowly, agonizingly slowly, placed the knife down on the edge of the platter. The metal made a dull clink against the porcelain. She turned her head to look at me. The warmth I had seen in her eyes all evening had evaporated, replaced by a confusion that rapidly hardened into a terrifying clarity. "What did you say? Harper?" she asked. Her voice was quiet. barely a whisper. But in the sudden vacuum of sound, it roared. "The check," I said, faltering slightly, my investigator brain suddenly pinging with a warning signal I could not yet identify. "The $500. I just wanted to say thank you." Dorothy stared at me. She looked like she had never seen me before, or perhaps, like she was seeing me for the very first time. She placed both hands flat on the table, bracing herself. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice calm as ice, "I wired you $1 million. The silence that followed was heavy, physical. It pressed against my eardrums. Time seemed to warp, stretching that single second into an eternity. I stood there, my glass still half raised, my brain struggling to process the disparity between the piece of paper in my pocket and the words coming out of her mouth. $1 million. My mother, Janine, broke the silence first. She let out a laugh that sounded like glass shattering in a garbage disposal. It was high, breathless, and completely devoid of humor. "Oh, Mother," she said, reaching for her wine glass with a hand that jerked sharply. "Do not be silly. You are confused. The medication the doctor gave you for your blood pressure makes you groggy. We talked about this." "I am not confused. Janine," Dorothy said, not breaking eye contact with me, across the table. My brother Caleb choked on his drink. He coughed violently into his napkin, his face turning a blotchy red. It was a visceral reaction, a body rejecting air. Beside him, Nolan did not help him. Instead, Nolan's eyes dropped immediately to his lap. I could see the blue light of a screen reflected in his glasses. He was checking his phone. He was not surprised. He was waiting for confirmation. And Harold. My stepfather continued to stare at his plate, but his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He stopped chewing. I slowly lowered myself back into my chair. The fraud investigator in me took over, pushing the confused granddaughter aside. I needed to establish a baseline. I needed to see who would crack. I adopted the mask I wore during interrogations, neutral, curious, non-threatening. "Grandma," I said softly, ignoring my mother's frantic signaling. $1 million is a lot of money. When did you send it?" 2 weeks ago, Dorothy said. She picked up her napkin and dabbed at the corner of her mouth, her movements regaining that terrifying precision. "I went to the bank. I sat with the manager. I authorized the wire transfer to the account number I have always had for you, the one we opened when you started college." "Mother, stop it," Janine hissed, her smile now looking like a rictus of pain. "Harper, do not listen to her. She has been having these episodes. She forgets things. She mixes up dreams with reality." "I do not dream about wire transfers, Janine," Dorothy snapped. The authority in her voice made Janine recoil physically. Dorothy turned back to me. "I sent it 2 weeks ago. Harper, it was everything. It was the sale of the rental properties, the bonds, everything I had liquid. I wanted you to have it before things got complicated." "Okay," I said, keeping my voice level, acting as the anchor she needed. "If you sent it 2 weeks ago, I should have seen it. I check my accounts regularly." Dorothy leaned forward. The candlelight caught the unshed tears in her eyes. But her expression was not sad. It was furious. "That is the problem. Harper," she whispered. "I checked the tracking the next day. The money arrived, and then, 24 hours later, it disappeared. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Disappeared." I repeated. "Money does not just disappear. Grandma, it moves. Where did it go?" "I do not know," she said. "But I know I did not move it. And I know you did not move it, because you did not even know it was there. Which leaves..." She trailed off, her gaze sweeping slowly around the table. It landed on Janine, then moved to Caleb, then lingered on Nolan, and finally brushed past Harold. It was an indictment. "Grandma," Caleb rasped, his voice hoarse from the coughing fit. "You are scaring everyone. You probably just moved it to savings and forgot, or maybe the bank made a mistake. You know how they are with seniors." "The bank did not make a mistake," Dorothy said firmly. I have the receipt. I have the confirmation code. Where is it? Janine demanded, her voice shrill. Where is this receipt? Mother, if you have it, show us. I have it safe, Dorothy said, and the way she said safe implied that safe meant away from you. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was not senility. This was a specific, detailed allegation, and the reactions around the table confirmed it. My mother was trying to gaslight her own mother. My brother was deflecting. His fiancée was disengaging, and my stepfather was invisible. Grandma, I asked, zeroing in on the most critical detail. Are you absolutely certain you sent it to our joint account, the one ending in 4589? Dorothy nodded. Yes, I know my own accounts. Harper, I wired $1 million to that account, and someone took it out. Who? Janine asked, trying to sound incredulous but failing. Who could possibly take money out of your account? Someone who has access, Dorothy said. Someone who sat at this table and smiled at me while they stole everything I saved for my granddaughter. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody ate. The Christmas music playing softly in the background, Bing Crosby dreaming of a white Christmas, felt grotesque against the tension. My mind raced. If the money was wired to a joint account, only two people should have access, me and Grandma, unless there was a third party, unless there was a power of attorney I did not know about, unless someone had impersonated one of us. I looked at my mother. She was gripping her wine glass so hard, I thought the stem would snap. She looked terrified. But not for Grandma. She looked terrified for herself. I looked at Caleb. He was wiping sweat from his forehead. Despite the cool air in the room, he looked guilty. But Caleb always looked guilty. He was soft, easily manipulated. I looked at Nolan. He had finally put his phone away, but he was staring at the centerpiece with a blank, hollow expression that I recognized from suspects who knew the net was closing in. Dorothy picked up her knife again, but she did not cut the turkey. She pointed it vaguely at the center of the table. I gave you that $500 check tonight, she said to me, because I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see who would look relieved that it was such a small amount. She turned her gaze to Janine. And you, Janine, you let out a sigh the moment Harper said $500. I did no such thing, Janine protested, her face flushing red. You did, Dorothy said. You all did. I needed to de-escalate this before it turned into a brawl, but I also needed evidence. I needed to understand the mechanics of the lie. If Grandma thought she sent $1 million, but handed me a check for $500, someone had orchestrated a cover-up. Someone had likely swapped the checks or manipulated her into writing the small one to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope she had given me. My fingers brushed against the crisp paper of the check. I pulled it out, keeping it below the table edge for a moment. Grandma, I said, did you write this check for $500 today? No, she said, frowning. I wrote a check for $500 yesterday. I put it in the card. I wanted you to have something to open, even if the real gift was gone. Okay, I said. I brought the check up into the light. I looked at the date, December 24th. I looked at the amount, $500.00. Then I looked at the signature line. My grandmother had taught me how to write in cursive when I was 6 years old. She had a very specific way of signing her name. The D in Dorothy always had a wide, sweeping loop at the top, and she never connected the Y to the K. It was a signature born of a strict Catholic school education in the 1940s. I stared at the black ink on the check in my hand. The D was narrow and sharp. The Y dragged into the K in a messy slur. It was a good attempt, perhaps enough to fool a teller who was not paying attention, or a granddaughter who was drunk on eggnog. But I was stone-cold sober. I looked up from the check. I looked at my mother, then at Caleb, then at Nolan. Grandma, I said, my voice barely steady as the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. You did not sign this check. Dorothy looked at me, her eyes wide. What? This signature, I said, holding it up. It is a forgery. The silence returned. But this time, it was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. Someone at this table had not only stolen $1 million, they had forged a check to keep me quiet, thinking $500 would be enough to buy my gratitude and my silence. They thought I would cash it and leave. They thought I was stupid. I looked at the faces around me. One of them was a criminal, and I was going to find out which one, even if I had to burn this whole Christmas dinner to the ground. The forged signature on the check was the final piece of a puzzle I had been assembling in the dark for nearly a week. Standing there in the silence of the dining room, holding that piece of paper that mocked my grandmother's trembling hand, I felt a cold, hard clarity wash over me. The confusion I had feigned earlier was gone. The shock was merely a performance for the benefit of the family. In truth, I had walked into this house with a loaded gun. Metaphorically speaking, I just needed to know who to point it at. My suspicion had not started with the dinner. It had started 6 days ago, in my apartment in Boise, with a phone call that felt wrong from the very first ring. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my floor, surrounded by takeout containers and case files from work, trying to unwind after chasing a syndicate of credit card skimmers across state lines. When my phone buzzed, the screen lit up with Caleb's name. My brother rarely called. We were a text message family, a meme-sharing family. A voice call usually meant someone was dead or someone was in jail. I answered with a mouthful of noodles, expecting a crisis. Instead, I got Caleb's voice, pitched an octave too high, dripping with a sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "Hey, Harper," he had said. "I was just thinking about you. Are you all packed for the trip?" "Mostly," I said, putting my chopsticks down. "Why do you need me to bring something?" No, he rushed to assure me. "I was actually thinking maybe you should sit this one out. You know, just stay in Idaho. Relax." I frowned at the phone. "Sit out Christmas, Caleb. I bought the ticket months ago. What are you talking about?" "It is just Grandma," he said, and I could hear him pacing. I could hear the floorboards of our childhood home creaking in the background. "She has been really tired lately. Harper, the doctor said she needs absolute quiet, no excitement. Having the whole house full, it might be too much for her heart. I was thinking maybe we should all just do our own thing this year." I narrowed my eyes. My grandmother was a woman who, at 79, had reshingled her own garden shed because the contractor was moving too slow. The idea that she wanted a quiet Christmas was laughable. She lived for the noise. She lived for the chaos of a full table. "Grandma told me last week she was making 3 pies, I said. She did not sound tired to me. "Well, things change fast at her age," Caleb said. "Mom said the doctor told us that." He stopped abruptly. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I mean, we all heard the doctor say it. It is a consensus. We just want what is best for her." That slip, Mom said, was the crack in the veneer. Caleb did not care about doctors. Caleb did not care about stress levels. Caleb cared about whatever my mother told him to care about. He was parroting a script, and he was doing a terrible job of it. "I will take my chances," I said, keeping my voice light. "I will be quiet as a mouse. See you soon. Caleb?" I hung up, but the unease did not leave me. It sat heavy in my gut. Why did they not want me there if Grandma was truly sick? They would want me home to say goodbye. Telling me to stay away suggested that my presence was a threat. I turned to my laptop. I did not log into my work VPN. I knew better than to use company resources for personal snooping, at least not yet. Instead, I opened a private browser window. When I started college, Grandma Dorothy had opened a joint checking account with me. It was meant for textbooks and emergency pizza money. Over the last decade, I had barely touched it, leaving a few $100s in there just to keep it active, mostly out of nostalgia. I had not logged in for 6 months. I typed in my credentials, reset my forgotten password, and waited for the 2-factor authentication code. When the dashboard finally loaded, I expected to see a balance of maybe $200. Instead, I saw a number that made the blood drain from my face. The current balance was $312.50. That was normal. But the available balance history told a different story. I clicked on the Transaction History tab, scrolling back to the beginning of the month. My eyes scanned the lines of data monthly maintenance fees, a stray interest payment of a few cents, and then, there it was. 2 weeks ago, December 10th, incoming wire transfer. The amount was staggering. $1 million exactly. The memo line was simple. Typed in all caps, for Harper Love, Grandma D. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Grandma had not been hallucinating at the dinner table. She had actually done it. She had liquidated her assets and sent me a fortune. For 24 hours. I had been a millionaire and I did not even know it. I scrolled up one line. December 11th, the very next day, outgoing wire transfer. The amount was $999,700. It was a surgical strike. Whoever had moved the money had left just enough behind to keep the account from hitting zero and triggering an automatic closure alert or an overdraft notification. They had cleaned me out, leaving me with scraps. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the back of my debit card. It was late, but the 24-hour fraud line picked up after 3 rings. I gave them my social security number, my mother's maiden name, the name of my first pet. I was shaking, but my voice was the voice of Harper Watson, senior risk analyst. I was cold. I was precise. I am looking at a wire transfer on December 11th, I told the representative, a woman named Sarah who sounded tired. I did not authorize this transaction. I need to know where it went. 1 moment, please, Sarah said. I heard the clicking of keys. Okay, I see the transaction. It looks like it was initiated in person at our Wilmington branch. In person, I asked. I am in Idaho. I have been in Idaho for 6 months. It physically could not have been me. I see, Sarah said, her voice shifting from bored to cautious. Well, Ms. Watson, the notes here say the transfer was authorized by a co-signer, or rather, an authorized representative. My grandmother is the only other person on the account, I said. Did Dorothy Klein sign for this? No, Sarah said. It was not Ms. Klein. The system shows the transaction was executed under a power of attorney document on file. I froze. A power of attorney. That is impossible. My grandmother does not have a power of attorney. She refuses to sign them. She handles all her own finances. Well, one was uploaded to our system on... Sarah paused. December 9th, just 1 day before the funds were deposited. The timeline was sickeningly perfect. The power of attorney was filed on the 9th. The money arrived on the 10th. The money was stolen on the 11th. It was a premeditated extraction. Someone knew the money was coming. Someone was waiting for it with a bucket to catch the water before it could reach me. I need a copy of that document, I said. I am the joint account holder. If someone is acting on this account, I have a right to see the authorization. I cannot send you the document directly due to privacy regulations regarding the principal, Sarah said, reciting the standard line. But I can tell you who the attorney in fact is listed as, the person who presented the document. Tell me, I whispered. I grabbed a pen and a notepad from my desk. I was ready to write down a stranger's name. I was ready to hunt down a scam artist, some slick con man who had tricked an 80-year-old woman. The power of attorney designates Janine Klein. Sarah said. The pen slipped from my fingers. Janine Klein, my mother. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely audible. Yes, ma'am, Janine Klein. The identification provided matches the details on file. I thanked Sarah and hung up the phone. I sat in the dark of my apartment for a long time, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The numbers blurred. $1 million. Gone. And the thief was the woman who had given birth to me. But it did not make sense. My mother was chaotic. Yes, she was bad with money. Yes, she was vain and occasionally selfish. But she was not a criminal mastermind. She did not know how to structure wire transfers to avoid flags. She barely knew how to use online banking. The precision of the withdrawal, leaving exactly enough to keep the account alive, suggested a level of sophistication that Janine simply did not possess. She had done it. The bank said so, but she had not done it alone. I spent the rest of that night building my file. I took screenshots of the transaction history. I downloaded the monthly statements going back 5 years to establish a baseline of normal activity. I created a timeline of events in a secure, encrypted folder on my personal drive. I named the folder Christmas Recipes to ensure that if anyone glanced at my desktop, they would see nothing of interest. I did not call the police. Not yet. I did not call my grandmother. If I told her over the phone, the shock might actually kill her, just as Caleb had warned. And if I tipped off my mother, she would have time to cover her tracks, to hide the money, to come up with a better lie. No, I had to go home. I had to sit at that table, eat their turkey, drink their wine, and look them in the eye. I had to see who squirmed. That was why I had flown to Wilmington. That was why I had hugged my mother when I walked through the door. That was why I had thanked my grandmother for the $500, knowing full well it was a distraction. Now, looking at the forged check in my hand, the timeline in my head clicked into place with a terrifying finality. December 9th. Mom files the power of attorney. December 10th. Grandma wires the $1 million. December 11th. Mom steals the $1 million. December 24th. Mom, or someone helping her, forges a check for $500 and slips it into Grandma's card to make sure I do not ask questions about the missing fortune. They thought $500 was the price of my complacency. They thought I would be so grateful for a little gas money that I would not bother to check the balance of an old college account. I looked up at my mother. She was pale, her red lipstick now looking like a garish wound on her face. She was not laughing anymore. "You filed the power of attorney," I said. It was not a question. Janine flinched as if I had slapped her. "Harper, you do not understand. We were trying to protect her assets. We were trying to protect the family. By stealing from me?" I asked. "It was never yours," she cried out, her voice cracking. "She is not in her right mind. Giving $1 million to a single girl living in Idaho, it is irresponsible. We put it somewhere safe." "Safe," I repeated. "Where is it, Janine?" "Because the bank record shows it went to an external account. It did not go to a trust. It did not go to a savings bond. It went out." Janine opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted to the side, not to Caleb, not to Harold. She looked at Nolan. It was a micro-expression, a flicker of movement that lasted less than a second. But in my line of work, that flicker was everything. It was the tell. Why would my mother look at my brother's fiancé when asked about the money? Nolan was a gym teacher. He was the most boring man I had ever met. He wore khakis and polo shirts and talked about protein intake. He had been in the family for 3 years, and in all that time, I had never seen him do anything more deceptive than cheat on a keto diet. But Janine had looked at him. And now that I was paying attention, I saw that Nolan was sweating. Not the nervous dampness of a bystander, but the profuse, cold sweat of a man whose life was unraveling. I folded the forged check and slid it into my pocket. "You know what?" I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that was far more dangerous than yelling. "I think we are done eating. I think I'm going to make some tea, and while the water boils, I am going to tell you exactly what is going to happen next." I turned to my grandmother. "Grandma, do not worry. I found the trail, and I'm going to follow it all the way to the end of the line." I walked out of the dining room, leaving the turkey cooling on the platter and my family frozen in a tableau of guilt. The investigation was no longer digital, it was personal, and I was just getting started. I retreated to the guest bedroom, a space that used to be my sanctuary when I was a teenager. The walls were still painted a soft lavender, and my old high school debate trophies were gathering dust on the shelf. I locked the door, engaging the simple push-button lock that felt flimsy against the weight of the conspiracy unfolding downstairs. I could hear the muffled sounds of an argument in the dining room, my mother's shrill defensiveness, Caleb's low murmur, the clinking of dishes being cleared by someone who was likely Harold trying to disappear into domestic tasks. I sat on the bed and opened my laptop. The air in the room felt stagnant, preserving the ghost of the girl I used to be. But that girl was gone. In her place sat a lead investigator for Summit Ridge, and I had work to do. I did not log into my corporate network. Using company tools to investigate family members was a firing offense, and I was not going to lose my career over my mother's greed. I had to rely on open-source intelligence OSINT and the access I legally possessed as a joint account holder. I cracked my knuckles, a habit I had picked up during late-night audits, and pulled up the bank portal again. I navigated back to the wire transfer details, earlier, on my phone. I had only glanced at the summary. Now, I downloaded the full transaction receipt, the PDF version that contained the raw metadata of the transfer. I scanned the document. The originating account was ours. The amount was $999,700. The date was December 11th. And there, in the field labeled Beneficiary Information, was the name I had been expecting to see, yet hoping I would not. Nolan Sutter. I stared at the name. My brother's fiancé. The man who taught 10th grade physical education and coached the junior varsity wrestling team. My initial reaction was a surge of validation. The way Nolan had looked at his phone, the way he had sweated at the table, it all made sense. He was the recipient. He was the bagman. For a moment, I constructed a narrative where Nolan and Caleb were the masterminds. Two young men tired of waiting for an inheritance, deciding to accelerate the process. But as I sat there, the investigator in me began to poke holes in that theory. It did not fit the profile. I had known Nolan for 3 years. He was a man of simple, almost painful transparency. He drove a 4-year-old Honda Civic and panicked if he got a parking ticket. He bought his clothes at outlet malls. He was obsessed with his credit score, which he checked on an app every time we went out for dinner, bragging if it went up by 2 points. He was risk-averse. Embezzling $1 million required a level of criminal audacity that Nolan simply did not possess. You do not go from counting calories to laundering 7-figure sums overnight. Furthermore, if Nolan had stolen $1 million 2 weeks ago, why was he still wearing a watch with a cracked face? Why was he still driving a car that needed a new muffler? I needed to look closer at the destination account. Using the routing number listed on the wire receipt, I identified the receiving bank as a regional credit union, one different from where Grandma banked. That was smart. It slowed down immediate internal flagging. I cross-referenced the account number with a few public database searches I utilized for personal verifications. I could not see the balance, but I could see the account origin data. The account in Nolan Sutter's name had been opened on December 5th. I did the math. That was exactly 19 days ago. It was 4 days before the power of attorney was filed. 5 days before the money landed. This was a burner account. In the world of money laundering, you do not use your primary checking account for the dirty hit. You open a fresh one, clean and empty, ready to catch the payload. I looked at the address associated with the account opening. It was not the apartment Nolan shared with Caleb on Sycamore Street. It was Unit 404 at 1200 Market Street. I opened a new tab and typed the address into Google Maps. I switched to Street View. 1200 Market Street was not a condo. It was a strip mall containing a vape shop, a dry cleaner, and a shipping center. Unit 404 was a private mailbox rental inside the shipping center. Nolan Sutter, the man who listed his parents' home address on his wedding registry because he was afraid of porch pirates, had opened a bank account using a P.O. box. That was a red flag the size of a billboard. It suggested coaching. Someone had told him to do this, or someone had done it using his name. I dug deeper. If the money had hit Nolan's account on December 11th, it likely did not stay there. $1 million sitting in a fresh account at a small credit union triggers alarms. The bank's compliance officer would be asking questions about the source of funds within 48 hours. The money had to move. It had to be layered. I searched the North Carolina Secretary of State's business registry. If they were smart, they would try to wash the money through a business entity to make it look like an investment or a purchase. I started searching for new filings in New Hanover County within the last 3 weeks. There were dozens of new LLCs. I filtered by registered agents. Nothing jumped out. Then I tried a different angle. I searched for entities connected to the address 1200 Market Street, Unit 404. One result popped up: Cape Fear Evergreen Holdings, LLC, date of formation, December 12th. One day after the money arrived in Nolan's account, I clicked on the filing details. The company was a ghost. The registered agent was a generic commercial service in Raleigh, designed to hide the true owners. The nature of business was listed vaguely as real estate investment and management. But every criminal makes a mistake, every single one, usually. It is in the contact information provided to the registrar for billing purposes. They remember to hide the owner's name, but they forget that the automated receipt has to go somewhere. I scrolled down to the bottom of the filing, to the section labeled Organizer Information. The name listed was the commercial agent, but the email address for correspondence was not the agent's. It was Janine Klein Design. I stopped breathing for a second. It was not her primary email, the one she used for family newsletters. It was an old email she had set up years ago when she briefly tried to start an interior decorating business that never got off the ground. She probably thought it was dead, or obscure enough that no one would recognize it. But I recognized it. So, the money went from Grandma to Nolan, and then presumably from Nolan to this shell company, Cape Fear Evergreen Holdings, which was controlled by my mother. It was a classic laundering cycle: placement the wire to Nolan, layering the transfer to the LLC. And now, I needed to find the integration. Where was the money landing? You do not steal $1 million just to let it sit in an LLC. You steal it to buy something. My mother's obsession had always been status. She wanted to be the matriarch of a wealthy family, even though she had never earned a dime of the wealth she coveted. I switched my search to county property records. If Cape Fear Evergreen Holdings was a real estate company, they were likely buying property. I searched the grantee index for New Hanover County. Nothing for the LLC yet. Deeds are only recorded after closing. If they were in the process of buying, it would not be public record yet. Unless they had filed a memorandum of contract, or if there was a construction lien, or I could try a darker, less reliable method. I went to the local MLS listings for Wilmington and filtered for pending or contingent properties priced between $800,000 and $1 million. There were 3 hits. One was a commercial lot, one was a historic home downtown, the third was a beachfront property on Wrightsville Beach, a stunning modern glass and steel structure listed at $1.2 million, but marked pending as of 3 days ago. I looked at the listing agent's notes. Cash offer accepted, quick close requested, cash offer, that fit. But I needed proof. I could not just guess. I went back to the bank activity. I needed to see if I could find a link between the LLC and a title company. I realized I was thinking too hard. I had access to something better than public records. I had the physical space of the house. I remembered the papers I had seen on the kitchen counter when I first arrived, the ones Mom had shoved into the junk drawer. At the time, I thought it was just clutter. Now, I knew it was evidence, but I could not go downstairs yet. I had to finish the digital trail first. I went back to the Janine Klein Design email address. I ran a search on that handle across a data breach repository, a standard tool I used to see if a subject's email had been compromised in leaks like the LinkedIn or Adobe hacks. The email appeared in a recent breach of a local DocuSign-style platform used by real estate agencies in the Carolinas. It did not give me her password, but it gave me the metadata of her recent activity. She had received 3 documents to sign in the last 48 hours from a sender domain, Coastal Title Escrow.com. I went to the Coastal Title Escrow website. It was a legitimate firm. On their Track My Closing portal, they required 2 things: a file number and the last 4 digits of the buyer's social security number. I did not have the file number, but I knew my mother's social security number. I had filled out her paperwork for Medicare supplements last year. I took a gamble. I typed in the last 4 digits of Janine's social, then, for the file number. I tried the property address of the beach house I had found on the MLS 2208 Ocean, invalid. I tried the LLC name, Cape Fear, invalid. I sat back, frustrated. Then I remembered the specific date of the pending status, December 22nd. I typed in the date code 122225. The screen flickered and loaded. It was a generic closing status dashboard. I had guessed the temporary file ID generated by their lazy IT system. The screen displayed the transaction details. Property 2208, Ocean Boulevard, Wrightsville Beach. Purchase price $1,100,000. Earnest money deposit. $50,000 received from Nolan Sutter. Balance due at closing $1,050,000. Wire to be received from Cape Fear Evergreen Holdings. Closing date. December 26th, tomorrow. My stomach turned. They were closing tomorrow. That was why Caleb had called me. That was why they wanted me to stay away. They needed 24 more hours to turn Grandma's life savings into a beach house. But then my eyes drifted to the line labeled Buyer S of Record. I expected to see the LLC. I expected to see a corporate veil, but I did not. The LLC was providing the funds. Yes. Nolan had provided the deposit. Yes. But the name on the deed, the person who would legally own the asset once the gavel fell tomorrow, was not a company. It was not the grandson who supposedly received the gift. The name listed as the sole owner was Janine Klein. I closed the laptop lid, my hands trembling with a rage so cold it felt like hypothermia. It was not a family conspiracy to help Grandma. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a harvest. My mother was using her son's fiancé as a money mule and her own mother as a piggy bank to buy herself a vacation home she could never afford. Nolan was just a pawn. He was the layering step, the fall guy if the IRS came knocking. The LLC was the wash cycle. But the house. The house was for Janine. I stood up. The silence in the house had deepened. The argument downstairs had stopped. I unlocked the door. I had the what, the how, and the who. Now I needed to find the why, and specifically, I needed to know if Nolan knew he was being used as a disposable buffer, or if he was dumb enough to think he was part of the family. I walked to the door, my footsteps silent on the carpet. I had one more stop before I went back to the war room. I needed to see that printer in the kitchen. I needed to see the physical paper that tied the digital ghost to the reality of this house. The cliffhanger was not just that Janine was buying a house. It was that she was stealing the identity of the purchase just as she had stolen the money. She was erasing everyone else from the equation, and tomorrow, she was going to sign the final papers, unless I stopped her. To understand the endgame, I have to take you back to the beginning of the arrival, before the dinner, before the bombshell of the $1 million. There was the careful, suffocating choreography of my return to Wilmington. I had landed at the airport with a smile painted on my face and a knot of dread in my stomach. The family group chat had been buzzing all morning with performative excitement gifs of Santa, photos of the tree, emojis of champagne glasses. I played along, typing, "Can't wait way," while sitting in the back of an Uber, watching the familiar pines of North Carolina blur past the window. I was a spy in my own history, armed with the knowledge of the stolen money, but lacking the face-to-face confirmation I needed to strike. When I walked through the front door of the house on Chestnut Street, the sensory overload was immediate. The smell of cinnamon and roasting meat was aggressive, a thick blanket designed to smother any tension. But underneath the holiday veneer, the house felt like a stage set where the actors were still frantically hiding the props from the previous scene. Harper, my mother, Janine, was in the kitchen. She spun around as I entered, her movement too sharp, too jerky. She was standing over the kitchen island, which was covered in a stack of thick, legal-sized documents. The moment she saw me, her eyes widened in a flash of genuine panic before the mask of maternal warmth slammed down. "You are here early," she exclaimed, rushing towards me. But as she moved, her hands swept behind her, scooping the pile of papers and shoving them haphazardly into the junk drawer. A corner of a blue folder snagged, refusing to go in, but she hip-checked the drawer shut with a violent thud. "Just beat the traffic," I said, letting her hug me. Her embrace was tight, vibrating with a nervous energy that felt like static electricity. She smelled of expensive perfume and stress sweat. "Well, go put your bags down," she said. pulling away and blocking my view of the kitchen counter with her body. "We are just getting things ready. It is a bit chaotic." "I can help," I offered, taking a step toward the counter. "No," she all but shouted. Then she forced a laugh. "No, sweetie, you are a guest. Go relax." Before I could press her, Caleb appeared from the living room. My brother looked exhausted. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he was wearing a festive sweater that looked like it was choking him. "Harper," he said, coming over to me. He did not hug me. He gripped my shoulders. "You made it. How was the flight? Was it delayed? Did you have to check a bag? Are you tired? You look tired. Maybe you should take a nap." The barrage of questions was not concern. It was an assessment of my alertness. He was checking to see if I was sharp enough to notice the cracks in the foundation. "I am fine, Caleb," I said, extricating myself from his grip. "The flight was easy. Why are you so worried about my sleep schedule?" "I just want you to have a good time," he said, his smile tight. "We all do. Just relax." "Okay, do not worry about anything." Then Nolan walked in. If Caleb was the nervous handler, Nolan was the reluctant accomplice. He was wearing a crisp, button-down shirt, but his posture was slumped. When he saw me, he offered a weak wave. "Hey, Harper," he said. He did not make eye contact. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a harsh, insistent vibration. He flinched, pulling it out immediately. He stared at the screen for a fraction of a second, his face paling, before shoving it back in his pocket. "Sorry," he muttered. "I have to take this work thing." "On Christmas Eve?" I asked. "Yeah, wrestling tournament logistics," he lied. I knew the wrestling season was on break. He turned and walked quickly towards the back porch, sliding the glass door shut behind him. Through the glass, I saw him answer the phone, his body language defensive, his hand chopping the air as if arguing with an invisible opponent. I left my bags in the hallway and walked into the living room, dressed in his usual cardigan. My stepfather, Harold, was sitting in his armchair by the fire. He was not reading or watching TV. He was just staring into the flames. Harold had always been a quiet man, a stepfather who believed his role was to provide stability rather than discipline. We had a polite, distant relationship. But as I walked past him, he reached out and caught my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. I stopped and looked down at him. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the fire. "Harold?" I asked softly. "Harper," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Tonight, just eat dinner." "What?" He turned his head slowly. His eyes were sad, filled with a resignation that chilled me more than my mother's panic. "Do not sign anything tonight, no matter what they put in front of you. Just eat dinner, and then go home." He let go of my wrist and turned back to the fire, shutting down completely. My heart was racing. Do not sign anything. That was a warning shot. Harold knew. He wasn't part of the scheme, but he was watching it happen, paralyzed by his own passivity. I needed to see Grandma. I went upstairs, bypassing my old room and heading straight for the master suite at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. Grandma Dorothy was sitting in her wingback chair by the window, looking out at the bare branches of the oak tree in the front yard. She was dressed in her Sunday best, a deep blue dress with a pearl necklace. She looked regal, but fragile. "Grandma?" I knocked softly on the doorframe. She turned, and her face lit up. It was the first genuine smile I had seen since entering the house. "Harper," she said, holding out her hands. "Come here, child." I walked over and sat on the ottoman at her feet, taking her hands in mine. They were cold, the skin papery and thin. "It is so good to see you," she said, squeezing my fingers. "I was afraid you would listen to Caleb and stay away." "I would never miss Christmas," I said. "How are you feeling?" "Caleb said the doctor wanted you to have quiet," she scoffed, a flash of her old spirit returning. "That boy, he listens to your mother too much. I am fine. Old? But fine. My heart is strong enough for dinner. Harper. It is my head they are worried about. Your head? I asked, probing gently. They think I am losing it, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your mother. She has been so helpful lately. Too helpful. She comes over every day to sort the mail. She says paperwork confuses me now. She says it is better if she handles the bills so I can just rest. And do you let her? I asked. I did. For a while, she admitted, looking away. It was nice, at first, not having to worry about the electric bill or the property tax, but then things started to feel wrong. I would ask to see a statement, and she would say she lost it. I would ask about the dividends, and she would say the market is down. She looked back at me, her eyes sharp. I may be 81, Harper, but I know how to balance a checkbook. I started to wonder if she was helping me or helping herself. Grandma, I said, deciding to take a risk. Did you sign any papers for her recently? Maybe a power of attorney? Dorothy frowned. She brought me a stack of papers last week. She said it was for the insurance, updates to the policy. There were so many pages. Harper, I tried to read them, but she was rushing me. She said the notary was waiting outside in the car and he was charging by the minute. So I signed where she pointed. My stomach clenched. That was it. The classic maneuver. Buried in a stack of insurance forms was the instrument of her own financial destruction. But, Dorothy said, leaning in closer, I am not as trusting as I used to be. After she left, I called the bank myself. I went down there the next day, and I made a transfer. The one I told you about. She was talking about the $1 million. But then it disappeared, she whispered. And that is when I knew the war had started. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small brass key. It was the key to the old decorative birdcage she kept on her dresser. The one she used to hide emergency cash in when I was a kid. Go to the birdcage, she said. Open the little tin box inside. I put the receipt there. The one from the wire transfer I made. I hid it before Janine could find it. I took the key. I will get it. There is something else in there too, she said. A letter. I wrote it last night. I was feeling heavy. I wanted to put my thoughts down in case I could not say them. I walked over to the dresser. The birdcage was an antique, filled with silk flowers. I unlocked the tiny door and reached in, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of a Sucrets tin. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was the bank receipt, folded into a tight square. I unfolded it. It was legitimate, a wire transfer for $1 million, authorized by Dorothy Klein, dated December 10th. It was the physical proof that matched the digital ghost I had seen online. But beneath the receipt was a sheet of stationery. I unfolded that too. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. My dearest Harper, if you are reading this, it means my fears were not the ramblings of an old woman. It means that the people I raised, the people I fed at my table, have betrayed me. I do not care about the money. Sweetie, I never did. I care that they think they can erase me while I'm still here. I care that they think you are weak enough to be bought. They will lie to you. They will tell you I am sick. They will tell you I gave it to them. Do not believe them. You are the only one who sees the world clearly. You are the only one who ever thanked me for the small things. Watch them tonight. Watch their hands. Watch their eyes. The truth is not in what they say. It is in what they hide. Love, Grandma D. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket, right next to the forged check. A lump formed in my throat, hot and painful. This was not just a financial crime. This was a violation of dignity. They were treating her like a corpse before she had even taken her last breath. I closed the tin and locked the birdcage. I had what I needed. As I turned to leave the room, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I paused, listening. It was heavy, purposeful treading. I slipped out of the bedroom and into the hallway, moving silently toward the back stairs that led down to the kitchen. I wanted to see the scene of the crime, the junk drawer. The kitchen was empty for a moment. I could hear Mom in the dining room, setting the table. I moved quickly to the counter where the printer sat. It was a sleek, wireless model. I lifted the lid of the scanner bed. Sometimes, people are careless. Sometimes, in their haste to digitize a lie, they leave a trace. The glass was empty, but I looked at the output tray. There was a single sheet of paper that had jammed, crinkled like an accordion at the back of the feed. I pulled it out carefully, trying not to tear it. It was a photocopy, a black and white scan of a document titled Durable Power of Attorney. The top half was clear, Principal Dorothy Klein, Agent Janine Klein, but the bottom of the page, the section for the notary acknowledgement, was weird. The paper had been placed on the glass at an angle, cutting off the corner where the notary's stamp should have been fully visible. I smoothed out the crinkled paper. I could see part of the stamp. E&T Mallory Commission expires, 2026. I did not know a notary named Mallory, but the name Trent Mallory rang a bell. He was not a lawyer. He was a financial consultant who advertised on late-night local cable, promising to help seniors protect their assets from the government. And there was something else. On the signature line for Dorothy, the ink looked too heavy, too thick. It looked like someone had traced over a faint line, or perhaps pasted a signature from another document and photocopied it to hide the cut lines. I heard the dining room door swing open. "Harper," Mom's voice called out. "Dinner is almost ready. Come have some wine." I shoved the jammed paper into my waistband, covering it with my sweater. "Coming, Mom," I called back, my voice bright and cheery. I walked into the dining room. The table was set. The candles were lit. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, but now I saw the strings. I saw the panic in Caleb's eyes as he poured the wine. I saw the guilt in Nolan's posture as he stared at his phone. I saw the desperation in my mother's smile. And I saw Harold, sitting in his chair, looking at me with a silent plea to just survive the night. I took my seat. I unfolded my napkin. "This looks lovely," I said, and then I waited for the curtain to rise. I sat back down at the dining table, the linen napkin heavy on my lap. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on, perfumed with the scent of roasted meat and the metallic tang of adrenaline that coated my tongue. I had the physical evidence of the forgery in my pocket and the knowledge of the stolen $1 million in my head, but I did not flip the table. Not yet. In my line of work at Summit Ridge, you learn that prematurely revealing your hand is the quickest way to let a guilty party scramble for a cover story. You have to let them get comfortable. You have to let them think they have gotten away with it, because that is when they make mistakes. I needed to see who would dig the hole deeper. I took a sip of wine, watching my family over the rim of the glass. They were all vibrating with a nervous energy that they were desperately trying to pass off as holiday excitement. "Harper, honey," my mother said, her voice bright and brittle. She stood up, smoothing the front of her red velvet dress. "Come help me in the kitchen for a second. I need to get the cranberry sauce, and I want to show you something." I set my glass down. "Sure, Mom." I followed her into the kitchen, the moment the swinging door closed behind us, cutting off the view of the dining room. Her smile dropped. She did not move toward the refrigerator. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a long, white envelope. "I almost forgot," she said, her tone shifting to a casual, bureaucratic, breezy style that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. "Since you are here, I need you to sign this. It is just a standard form. We are doing some housekeeping on the family trust and the insurance policies, just updating the beneficiary details since Grandma is, well, getting older." She slid a document out of the envelope and laid it on the granite countertop, handing me a pen in the same motion. "Just right there at the bottom," she said, tapping a line with a manicured fingernail. "It just confirms you are aware of the administrative changes." I looked down at the paper. It was titled, "Beneficiary Confirmation and Waiver of Notice. To a Layman." It looked like boring legal boilerplate, but I read contracts for a living. I scanned the dense paragraphs, ignoring her finger tapping impatiently on the signature line. The language was deliberately opaque. It referenced consenting to the restructuring of liquid assets and waiving the right to contest prior transfers made by the acting power of attorney. It was not a beneficiary update. It was a retroactive permission slip. If I signed this, I would be legally validating everything she had done in the last 2 weeks. I would be signing away my right to sue her for the theft of the $1 million. She was trying to trick me into immunizing her against her own crime, using the cranberry sauce as bait. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice light, "I have had a glass of wine. You know I never sign anything after drinking. Summit Ridge policy has brainwashed me." "It is not a contract, Harper," she snapped, a flash of desperation cracking through her facade. "It is just a family form. Do you not trust me?" "Of course I do," I lied, smiling at her. "But I really need to read it properly. My eyes are tired from the flight. Let me take it upstairs later. I will sign it before I leave tomorrow." I saw the panic flare in her eyes. She wanted that signature now. She needed it before the closing tomorrow. "Just do not lose it," she said, snatching the paper back, but then hesitating. She could not force me. "Fine, later. But tonight? Okay." "Tonight?" I promised. She turned to grab the serving bowl from the counter. In that split second, while her back was turned, I pulled out my phone. The document was still sitting face up on the granite where she had hesitated. I snapped 2 high-resolution photos of the text, capturing the waiver of notice clause clearly. "Ready?" she asked, turning back around. "Ready," I said. Slipping my phone into my pocket, we walked back into the dining room. Caleb was standing over Grandma Dorothy, holding a small orange prescription bottle. "Grandma," Caleb was saying, his voice oozing a sickly sweetness, "I really think you should take your evening pills now. Mom said the doctor wants you on a strict schedule." He shook 2 pills into his hand. They were blue. I recognized them. They were her sleeping aids, usually reserved for insomnia. "Caleb," Dorothy said, looking at the pills with distaste. "It is 6:30 in the evening. I'm not going to bed. We have not even had the pie." I know, Caleb said, glancing nervously at the clock on the wall. "But they take a while to kick in, and you know how you get agitated when there are too many people. We just want you to be relaxed. It is for your own good." I watched his hand. It was shaking slightly. He was trying to sedate her. They did not want her talking during dinner. They were terrified she would say exactly what she had said to me in the bedroom, that the money was gone. If she was asleep or groggy, they could control the narrative. "I am perfectly relaxed," Dorothy said firmly, pushing his hand away. "Put those away. Caleb?" "Mom said," Caleb started, looking toward Janine for backup. "Caleb," I cut in, my voice sharp. "She said no. Let her eat her dinner. If she is tired later, she can take them." Caleb looked at me, his eyes wide and frightened. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches. He shoved the pills back into the bottle and shoved the bottle into his pocket. "Fine," he muttered. "I was just trying to help." I looked across the table at Nolan. He was pouring himself another glass of wine, filling it almost to the brim. He took a large gulp, his eyes darting around the room, landing on the windows, the door, anywhere but us. "Everything okay, Nolan?" I asked. He jumped, splashing a little wine onto the tablecloth. "Yeah," he stammered. "Yeah, fine. Just work stress." He looked at Caleb, then at Janine, and then he whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. "We just need to get through tonight." He stopped abruptly, his eyes locking with mine. He realized he had spoken the quiet part out loud. "Get through what?" I asked. "Nothing," Nolan said quickly. "Just the holiday. You know, it is always busy." But I knew, just need to get through tonight, because tomorrow morning, the escrow office opened. Tomorrow morning, the wire transfer from the shell company would clear. Tomorrow morning, the house on Wrightsville Beach would officially belong to Janine Klein, and the evidence would be buried under a mountain of closing documents. Suddenly, a phone rang. It was not the festive jingle of a family call. It was a standard, harsh ringtone coming from the sideboard where my mother had left her clutch. Janine froze. She looked at the caller ID and her face went pale. "I have to take this," she said, scrambling up from her chair. "It is the caterer for the brunch tomorrow." I thought we were cooking brunch, Harold said, looking up from his plate. No, Harold, just eat, Janine hissed. She grabbed the phone and practically ran into the hallway. I waited 3 seconds. Excuse me, I said. I left my phone in my bag. I stood up and walked into the hallway. I did not go to my bag. I moved silently toward the gap between the hallway and the front sitting room, pressing my back against the wall. My mother was pacing in the dark sitting room, her voice a hushed, frantic whisper. Trent, why are you calling me now? She hissed. She is here. She is sitting right at the table. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. No, she does not suspect anything, Janine said. She bought the story about the trust updates. I gave her the waiver. She's going to sign it tonight. Another pause. Are you sure the funds are locked? She asked, her voice trembling. If she calls the bank, okay. Okay. Good. Just have the papers ready at the escrow office at 9. We will be there. I will bring the new POA just in case. She hung up. I stayed frozen against the wall, my mind racing. Trent. She was not talking to a caterer. She was talking to her co-conspirator. And now I had a name. I slipped back into the dining room before she could catch me, sitting down just as she returned. She looked flushed, breathless. Everything okay? I asked. Fine, she said, forcing a smile. Just a mix-up with the croissants. I picked up my phone under the table. I needed to know who Trent was. I typed Trent Financial Wilmington, NC into the search bar. The results populated instantly. Trent Mallory. Mallory Wealth Solutions. I clicked on his website. It was slick, filled with stock photos of happy seniors on sailboats and vague promises about asset protection and legacy planning. But when I switched to a search for news articles and court records, the picture changed. There was a consumer alert from the Better Business Bureau from 2 years ago. Alert Mallory Wealth Solutions subject to multiple complaints regarding unauthorized restructuring of senior assets. There was a link to a local news story. Local financial advisor sued by a state for predatory lending. He was not a bank official. He was not a lawyer. He was a predator who targeted the elderly, convinced them to sign over control of their finances under the guise of protection, and then drained them dry through high-fee investments and complex real estate schemes. And he was working with my mother. I felt a cold realization settle over me. My mother was not smart enough to set up the shell company, the P.O. box, and the layered transfers on her own. I had given her too much credit. She was the vehicle, but Trent Mallory was the driver. He had found a desperate woman with a wealthy mother, and he had given her the blueprint to steal $1 million. But there was one final connection I needed to make. I thought back to the crumpled paper I had pulled from the printer earlier, the photocopy of the power of attorney with the bad signature. The notary stamp had been cut off, showing only E.N.T. Mallory. I had assumed Mallory was a last name of a notary. I zoomed in on the photo of Trent Mallory on his website. In the background of his office, on a bookshelf, was a large, distinct rubber stamp. I switched back to the photo I had taken of the jammed paper. The notary seal did not belong to an independent third party. The name on the stamp was Trent Mallory, in North Carolina. As in most states, a notary cannot notarize a document in which they have a financial interest. If Trent was the one advising Janine, if he was the one brokering the real estate deal where the stolen money was going, he had a direct financial interest. Notarizing the power of attorney that allowed Janine to move the money was not just unethical, it was a felony. He had notarized his own crime. I looked up from my phone. My mother was cutting her turkey, her hands shaking so badly the fork was rattling against the plate. Caleb was staring at the pills in his pocket. Nolan was checking his watch. They were all terrified. They were all trapped in a scheme that was crumbling, and they were pinning their hopes on a criminal who had already left a paper trail a mile wide. I put my phone down on the table, screen down. So, I said, breaking the silence, who is excited for tomorrow? Janine looked up, her eyes wide. Why, what is happening tomorrow? Christmas morning, I said, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. And whatever else the day brings. I saw Nolan swallow hard. I was not going to sign the waiver. I was not going to let Grandma take the pills. And I was certainly not going to let them get to that escrow office at 9 o'clock. But first, I had to survive dinner. And I had a feeling that the main course was about to be served with a side of absolute chaos. The dining room table had become a minefield, and I was the only one who knew where the tripwires were buried. The conversation had lulled into the rhythmic clinking of silverware against china, a sound that usually signified comfort, but tonight sounded like the ticking of a bomb. I looked at the check in my pocket, then at the faces of my family. My mother was aggressively buttering a roll. Caleb was staring into his wineglass. Nolan was vibrating with anxiety, and Grandma Dorothy sat at the head of the table, her eyes sharp, waiting for the signal she did not know she had sent. I decided it was time to detonate the room. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that Harold paused mid-chew, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. I picked up my wineglass, tapping it gently with my fingernail. It made a hollow, crystal sound. "I just wanted to say a few words," I said, my voice steady, projecting the kind of calm authority I used when deposing a hostile witness. "It is so good to be back in Wilmington, and I wanted to say a special thank you to Grandma." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope she had given me, holding it up so everyone could see the crisp white paper. "Thank you for the check, Grandma," I said, looking directly at her. $500 is very generous. It will really help with the travel expenses." The reaction was instantaneous. Dorothy, who had been in the middle of slicing a piece of turkey, froze. Her hand stopped moving. The knife remained buried in the meat. She did not blink. She did not breathe. She turned her head slowly to look at me, and the expression on her face was not the dementia-riddled confusion my mother had promised. It was the cold, hard shock of a woman realizing she had been played. She placed the knife down on the platter with deliberate, terrifying slowness. "What did you say, Harper?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the room, it carried like a scream. "The check," I repeated, watching my mother's face out of the corner of my eye. Janine had stopped chewing. Her eyes were darting from me to Dorothy. $500. Dorothy stared at me. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming calm as ice. "I wired you $1 million. Did you not receive it?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. My mother, Janine, laughed. It was a terrible sound, high-pitched and frantic, like a bird flying into a window. "Oh, Mother," Janine cried out, reaching across the table to pat Dorothy's hand. "You are confused again. It is the medication. Remember what Dr. Evans said? The new blood pressure pills can make you mix up your numbers. You are thinking of the Monopoly money we played with last week. $1 million. Goodness, where would you even get that?" She looked around the table, her eyes pleading for backup. "She is having an episode. Caleb, get her water. I am not thirsty." "Janine," Dorothy said. She did not look at her daughter. She kept her eyes locked on mine. "And I am not confused. I went to the bank on December 10th. I sat in Mr. Henderson's office. I wired the money, the entire investment portfolio." "Grandma." "Stop," Caleb said, his voice cracking. He had choked on his drink a moment earlier and was now wiping his mouth with a napkin. His face flushed. "You are embarrassing yourself. You do not have $1 million to give. You are on a fixed income." "I had it," Dorothy said, her voice sharpening. 2 weeks ago, and now Harper is thanking me for $500. She turned her gaze to Janine. "So tell me, Janine, who stole it from you at my table? Because if Harper did not get it, someone else did." "Nobody stole anything," Janine shrieked, slamming her hand down on the table. The silverware jumped. "You are senile. Mother, you are imagining things." There was no wire transfer. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply leaned forward, resting my knuckles on the white tablecloth, and looked at my grandmother. "Grandma," I said softly, cutting through Janine's hysteria, "I need you to answer one question for me. And I need you to be absolutely sure. Dorothy looked at me. Ask me? Did you sign a power of attorney document 2 weeks ago? I asked. Did you sign a piece of paper giving Mom full control over your bank accounts, your estate, and your legal decisions? Janine gasped. Harper, how dare you? Dorothy did not flinch. No, she said, her voice firm, hitting the word like a hammer. I did not. I have never signed a power of attorney. I told Janine specifically that I would not do it until I was in a hospital bed. She is lying, Janine yelled, standing up now. She forgets. She signed it right here on the kitchen table. Caleb was here. Caleb saw it. I looked at Caleb. He shrank into his chair, unable to meet my eyes. Caleb, I asked, did you see her sign it? I. Caleb stammered. I saw papers. I do not know what they were. Mom said they were signed. She only signed Christmas cards, Dorothy declared. That is all I have signed in months. Christmas cards and the check for my tithe. You are twisting everything. Caleb suddenly snapped. Finding his courage in anger, he turned on me, his face twisting into a sneer. This is what you do, Harper. You come home once a year and you act like you are better than us. You bring your work home with you. You are so obsessed with catching criminals that you think your own family is a syndicate. You are paranoid. You are seeing ghosts because that is all you do all day in Idaho. It is not paranoia if the money is missing. Caleb, I said calmly. There is no money, he shouted. It is a fantasy. Grandma is old. She makes things up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had already prepared the image in the gallery, a composite screenshot I had made upstairs. On the left side was the bank transaction history showing the outgoing wire of $999,700. On the right side was the account opening data for Nolan Sutter at the credit union. I am going to show you something, I said, and I want you to look closely. I slid the phone across the polished wood of the table. It spun slowly and came to a stop right in front of Nolan. Nolan looked down. He did not want to look, but he could not help it. The screen was bright in the dim room. He saw the numbers, he saw the date, and then he saw his name. Account holder Nolan Sutter. Date opened December 05, 2025. Address 1200 Market Street, Unit 404. Nolan's face went the color of ash. He stood up so fast his chair toppled over backward with a loud crash. I did not open that, he said. His voice was trembling. That is my name. But I did not open that account. Nolan, sit down, Janine hissed, her eyes wide with panic. Do not look at her phone. It is fake. She photoshopped it. I did not open it, Nolan yelled, backing away from the table. He looked at Caleb. You told me we were just holding money for the wedding. You said your mom gave us a gift. You never said anything about a secret account at a credit union. I bank at Bank of America. Nolan! Shut up, Caleb shouted. No, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Keep talking, Nolan, because right now, that wire transfer is in your name. Which means, when the FBI looks at this, they are not going to look at Janine. They are going to look at you. You are the one on the hook for grand larceny. Nolan looked at me, then at Janine, his eyes filled with betrayal. You used my social, you used my identity. We were protecting the assets, Janine screamed. It was going to be for all of us, for the beach house, for the family. The beach house that is in your name, I asked, because I checked the deed. Mom, Nolan is not on it, Caleb is not on it, just you. Janine froze. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Dorothy, who had been watching this disintegration with a look of profound sorrow, spoke up again. She picked up her wine glass, her hand shaking, but she took a sip before setting it down. I knew, she said softly. We all turned to her. I knew something was wrong when the money disappeared, she said, but I did not know who. I did not know if it was strangers or if it was you. She looked at Janine. So I wrote that check for $500 yesterday. I forged my own signature on it, just a little bit, to see if anyone would notice, but mostly I wanted to see your faces when Harper thanked me for such a small amount. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. I wanted to see who would be relieved that the secret was safe. And when Harper said $500, Janine, you let out a breath you had been holding for 2 weeks. Mother, please, Janine sobbed, collapsing into her chair. We are in debt. Trent said this was the only way. He said we could pay it back with the rental income. Trent? Dorothy asked. That man on the television, he is a financial genius, Janine cried. He is helping us. He is helping himself, I said, and he is using you to do it. Janine shook her head violently. No, you do not understand. He has a plan. We are closing tomorrow. It is all set. Once the house is ours, everything will be fine. She grabbed her phone from the table, her fingers fumbling with the screen. I have the confirmation right here. I will show you. It is a legitimate investment. She was frantic, tapping at her screen, trying to pull up an email to prove that she was a savvy investor and not a thief. She was swiping wildly, her hands shaking so hard she kept missing the icons. Look, she said. I will cast it to the TV so you can all see the prospectus. You will see. She hit the cast button on her phone. The large smart TV mounted above the fireplace in the living room flickered to life. It was visible to everyone at the table through the wide archway connecting the rooms. The screen went black for a second, then mirrored Janine's phone display, but she had not opened the prospectus. In her panic, she had opened her inbox to the most recent email she had received, which had just arrived 2 minutes ago. The subject line was bold and clear in 40-inch high definition. Escrow confirmation urgent. Below it, the preview text was visible to the entire room. From Trent Mallory Wealth, com, to Janine Klein. Janine, do not worry about the girl. I have the notary seal ready for the morning. Just get her signature on the waiver tonight or forge it like the last one. We close at 9:00 a.m. The house will be in our names by noon. Remember, I get 40% equity as agreed. The room went silent. It was not just a house for Janine. It was a partnership, and the email explicitly commanded her to commit forgery. Janine stared at the TV, her face draining of all color. She scrambled to disconnect the phone, tapping the screen frantically, but in her haste, she dropped the device. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, cracking the screen. But the image on the TV remained, frozen on the damning evidence. Our names, I read aloud, my voice flat. Janine Klein and Trent Mallory. I looked at my mother. He is not your advisor, Mom. He is your partner in crime, and he is taking almost half of Grandma's money for himself. Janine looked up at me, and for the first time, there was no anger in her eyes, only terror. He said, she whispered, he said it was standard fees. 40% is not a fee, I said. It is a heist. I stood there, the evidence glowing on the screen behind me, the ruined dinner in front of me, and the realization hitting everyone that the betrayal went deeper than just family greed. We had let a wolf into the fold, and he was waiting for us at the escrow office tomorrow morning. The image on the television screen burned into the room like a brand. The words 40% equity and forge it like the last one hung in the air, stripping away the last shreds of plausible deniability my mother had clung to. The silence that followed was not the stunned silence of the dinner table. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a family that had just been severed at the root. Grandma Dorothy was the first to move. She did not scream. She did not throw her wine glass. She simply placed both hands on the edge of the table and pushed her chair back. The scrape of wood against wood was a harsh, definitive sound. Harper, she said. Her voice was thin, trembling with a mixture of shock and a terrible, icy rage. Take me to the living room. I cannot sit at this table a moment longer. I was at her side in an instant. I offered her my arm, and she gripped it with surprising strength. Her fingers dug into my bicep, anchoring herself against the vertigo of betrayal. Mother, wait, Janine stammered, scrambling up from her chair. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air, desperate to bridge the gap she had created. You have to understand. You are upset. You need to rest. The doctor said any excitement is dangerous. Harper is making you agitated. Janine tried to step between us, her face a mask of frantic denial. She looked like she was trying to herd a stray cat back into a cage. Let me take you upstairs. I will explain everything. It is just a misunderstanding. Sit down, Janine. The voice came from the fireplace. It was Harold, my stepfather, the man who had spent 20 years blending into the upholstery, the man who chewed his food 30 times before swallowing, the man I had written off as a piece of furniture. He stood up. He did not look like a furniture piece now. He stepped in front of Janine, blocking her path to Dorothy. He was not aggressive, but he was immovable. He was a wall of beige wool and quiet disappointment. Harold, Janine gasped, looking at him as if he had suddenly grown a second head. Move. I need to help my mother. Let her speak, Harold said. His voice was low, devoid of anger but heavy with a finality I had never heard from him. You have done enough helping. Let her speak to Harper. Janine stopped. She looked at Harold, then at the glowing TV screen that still displayed her conspiracy, and she seemed to shrink. She slumped back against the sideboard, covering her mouth with her hand. I guided Dorothy into the living room. The Christmas tree was twinkling in the corner, its multicolored lights reflecting off the ornaments she had collected for 50 years. It felt perverse, this festive backdrop to a financial execution. I helped her into her favorite wingback chair, the one with the floral upholstery that smelled of lavender and old paper. Water, she whispered. I will get it, I said. No, she said sharply, grabbing my wrist. Do not leave this room. Do not leave me alone with them. Use the pitcher on the side table. I poured her a glass of water. She took a sip, her hand shaking so hard the water sloshed over the rim, darkening the blue silk of her dress. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Call the bank, she said. Now. I was going to call the police, I said, reaching for my phone. Grandma, this is fraud. This is elder abuse. We need a police report to stop the closing tomorrow. No police, she said firmly. Not tonight. I do not want sirens in my driveway on Christmas Eve. I do not want the neighbors watching my daughter being handcuffed on the front lawn. Grandma, she stole $1 million, I argued gently. I know what she did, Dorothy snapped, her eyes flashing. But she is still my daughter, and if we call the police now, I lose control of what happens next. I want the money stopped. I want the accounts locked, but I want to do it my way. Call the bank. I respected the decision. It was a tactical error in my book, but it was her life. I dialed the emergency fraud hotline for the bank. It was late, Christmas Eve. But major banks maintain 24-hour security desks for high-net-worth clients and wire fraud. I put the phone on speaker so she could hear. The hold music was a tinny, synthesized jazz tune that grated on my nerves. Summit Ridge Risk Department has a direct line, I muttered. I could call in a favor. No, Dorothy said. We do it by the book, a representative picked up. Fraud prevention. This is Marcus. How can I help you? My name is Harper Watson, I said, switching into my professional cadence. I am the joint account holder on an account ending in 4589. I am sitting here with the primary account holder, Dorothy Klein. We are reporting an unauthorized wire transfer of $999,700 executed on December 11th. We are also reporting that the power of attorney on file was obtained fraudulently and is currently being used to facilitate further theft. I gave him the social security numbers, the verification codes, the mother's maiden name. I used the specific keywords that trigger immediate compliance protocols: elder financial exploitation, identity theft, imminent loss of funds. I see the transaction, Marcus said, his voice tightening. And I see the power of attorney note. You are saying this was not authorized. The principal is right here, I said. Speak, Grandma. I did not authorize it, Dorothy said, her voice clear and strong. And I did not sign that paper. Freeze it all, young man. Freeze every penny. If a single dollar moves out of that account or any connected account, I will sue your bank into the ground. Understood. Ms. Klein, Marcus said. I am placing a code red lock on the account immediately. I am also flagging the beneficiary account for review. No funds will be released. We will launch a formal investigation the day after Christmas. I hung up. The immediate bleeding had been stopped, but the money was already out of the main account. It was sitting in the escrow limbo, or in Nolan's sham account. It is done, I said. They cannot move the money tomorrow. Dorothy leaned back, closing her eyes. She looked 10 years older than she had an hour ago. Thank you. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. It was followed by a cheerful, rhythmic knocking, shave and a haircut. 2 bits. I looked at the clock on the mantel. It was nearly 9 in the evening. Who came to visit at 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve? I heard Janine gasp in the dining room. I heard the scuffle of feet. Do not answer it, I called out, standing up, but it was too late. I heard the heavy oak door creak open, and then I heard a voice that was smooth, rich, and dripping with synthetic charm. Merry Christmas. I know it is late, but I was in the neighborhood dropping off gifts for my favorite clients, and I saw the lights were still on. I walked to the archway separating the living room from the foyer. Standing in the entryway was a man I recognized instantly from his website, Trent Mallory. He was wearing a camel hair coat that looked softer than butter, a cashmere scarf draped artfully around his neck, and a smile that showed too many teeth. He was holding a magnum of expensive red wine in one hand and a gold-wrapped box in the other. He looked perfect. He looked successful. He looked like a predator who had come to check on his trap. Janine was standing by the door, looking like she had seen a ghost. She was pale, shaking, clearly terrified that her 2 worlds, the victim daughter and the co-conspirator, were colliding. Trent, she whispered, you should not be here. Nonsense, Trent said, stepping into the house uninvited. He wiped his feet on the rug with exaggerated politeness. I just wanted to bring something for Dorothy. Is she up? He looked past Janine and saw me standing in the archway. His eyes flickered over me in assessment, a calculation before settling on the warm smile again. You must be Harper, he said, extending a hand that was perfectly manicured. Janine talks about you all the time, the investigator from Idaho. Impressive work. I did not shake his hand. I crossed my arms. You are bold, Trent, I said. Or you are stupid. Coming here tonight. Trent's smile did not waver, but the corners of his eyes tightened. Excuse me. We saw the email, I said. The one you sent Janine, the one about the 40% equity, the one about the forgery. It was cast to the living room TV. For a second, the mask slipped. Just a fraction. A flash of genuine alarm passed over his face, but he smoothed it over instantly. He was a professional con man. He knew how to pivot. Ah, he said, lowering his hand. He set the wine bottle down on the entry table. Well, that is unfortunate. Electronic communication can be so blunt. It lacks nuance. He walked past me, heading straight for Dorothy. I stepped in his path, blocking him. Get out of my house, I said. Harper, please, Trent said, his voice dropping to a confidential, reasonable tone. Let us not make a scene. I am here to help your grandmother. Truly, Janine came to me because she was drowning in debt. She was worried about the estate. We structured a deal that would save the family home and generate income. By stealing $1 million, I asked. Not stealing, Trent corrected gently. Reallocating. Dorothy was keeping that money in low-yield bonds. It was dying on the vine. I moved it into high-growth real estate. The beach house is a gold mine. It will pay for Dorothy's care for the next 20 years. And yes, I take a fee. I take equity because I'm putting my own reputation on the line. He looked over my shoulder at Dorothy. Dorothy, hello. You look lovely. I am sorry about the confusion. Your daughter was just trying to do the right thing. Dorothy opened her eyes. She looked at him with a gaze that could have stripped paint from a wall. You are the man from the commercial, she said. I am, Trent said, beaming. Mallory Wealth Solutions. You are a thief, she said. Trent sighed, a sound of patient suffering. This is the problem with these situations. Emotions get high, narratives get twisted. Harper, you are a professional. You understand that sometimes, to save a portfolio, you have to take aggressive action. I have a question for you. Trent, I said, if this is all above board, if this is just aggressive portfolio management, why did the money have to go through a credit union account opened by a gym teacher? Trent froze. It was the one detail he had not prepared for. He knew about the LLC, he knew about the escrow, but he likely assumed Nolan was a silent, willing participant, or that I had not dug deep enough to find the layering account. I am not sure what you mean, he said, blinking. Nolan Sutter, I said. My brother's fiancé. You or Janine, under your instruction, opened an account in his name at a credit union on December 5th. The money went there first, then to the LLC. Why layer it? Trent, why wash the money if it is a legitimate investment? Trent licked his lips. He looked at Janine, who was cowering by the door. He realized the containment breach was total. He decided to go on the offensive. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. For a second, my heart hammered, wondering if he was reaching for a weapon, but he pulled out a folded document. You want to talk about authorization, he said, his voice hardening. You want to talk about fraud, let us talk about memory loss, because I have this. He unfolded the paper and held it up. He did not hand it to me. He held it up like a shield. This is a consent to transfer assets, Trent declared. Dated December 1st, signed by Dorothy Klein, notarized by an independent agent in Raleigh. It explicitly authorizes the creation of the Cape Fear Evergreen LLC and the funding thereof. He turned the paper so Dorothy could see it. Look at the signature. Dorothy, he challenged. Is that your signature? I stepped closer, squinting at the document. The signature at the bottom was not the shaky, slurry mess that was on the $500 check. It was not the sharp, forged attempt I had seen on the power of attorney photocopy. It was perfect. It had the sweeping loop on the D, the disconnected Y, the precise slant. It looked exactly like the signature on my birthday cards from 10 years ago. It was undeniable. Janine stepped forward, looking at the paper with confusion. I never saw that one. You did not need to, Trent said smoothly. Dorothy signed it in my office. She came to see me. She forgets. Of course. That is why we are here. That is why Janine had to take over, because Dorothy agrees to things one day and forgets them the next. He looked at me, a smug triumph in his eyes. You can freeze the accounts, Harper, but I have a signed contract, and if you stop this closing, I will sue this estate for breach of contract, and I will win. The signature is real. I looked at Dorothy. My stomach dropped. Had she forgotten? Was it possible that in a moment of confusion, or coercion, she had actually signed this? Dorothy leaned forward. She squinted at the paper. She looked at the signature for a long, agonizing minute. Then she looked up at Trent. Her face was pale, drained of blood, but her eyes were wide with a terrifying realization. That is my signature, she whispered. Trent smiled. See, I told you. But, Dorothy continued, her voice gaining strength, I have never seen that piece of paper in my life. You just said it is your signature, Trent said, losing patience. It is, Dorothy said, pointing a shaking finger at the document. It is my signature from 1998. It is the signature I used on your grandfather's death certificate. She looked at me. I remember it because the pen skipped on the K. I remember that little gap in the ink. I have looked at that copy of the death certificate every day for 20 years. It sits on my vanity. She looked back at Trent. You did not forge my signature, young man. You photocopied it. You lifted it from a public record death certificate and pasted it onto your lies. The room went dead silent. Trent lowered the paper slowly. The smugness vanished, replaced by the cold, reptilian stare of a man who realized he had just walked into a trap of his own making. And now, Dorothy said, leaning back into her chair, I think you should leave my house before Harper changes her mind about calling the police. Trent left the house with the casual arrogance of a man who believes he is untouchable, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him like the seal on a vault. He left behind a silence that was heavier than the one at dinner. It was the silence of a battlefield after the shelling has stopped, where the survivors are just beginning to count the casualties. I did not sleep. The concept of sleep seemed laughable, a luxury for people whose families were not imploding. Instead, I turned the kitchen island into a forensic lab. The rest of the family had dispersed to various corners of the house, Dorothy to her room with the door locked, Caleb to the back porch to smoke cigarettes he thought we did not know about, and Nolan to the guest room, presumably to call a lawyer. Janine had locked herself in the master bath, and I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of water running, as if she were trying to wash the evening away. I made a pot of black coffee strong enough to strip paint and opened my laptop. I had work to do. First, I needed to technically verify what Grandma Dorothy had spotted with her naked eye. I had managed to snap a high-resolution photo of the document Trent had flourished the consent to transfer, with the signature lifted from my grandfather's death certificate. I uploaded the image to my photo editing software and zoomed in to 400%. To the naked eye, a signature is just ink on paper. To a digital forensic analysis, it is a landscape. I switched to the negative filter. There it was. Around the loops of the D and the K, there was a faint, jagged halo of pixelation, a ghostly gray border where the background of the original document had been imperfectly erased before being pasted onto the new one. It was a digital artifact known as trash, leftover noise from a scan. Furthermore, the pressure of the pen was uniform. A real signature has valleys and peaks where the pen presses harder on the downstroke. This was flat. It was a stamp, a two-dimensional lie. I saved the analysis. Exhibit A. Harper. I jumped slightly. Harold was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing his plaid bathrobe, looking more like a ghost than a man. He held a stack of envelopes in his hand, bound together with a rubber band. "Harold," I said, rubbing my eyes, "I am busy building a case." "I know," he said softly. He walked over to the island and placed the stack of envelopes on the granite, right next to my laptop. "I think you need these." "What are they?" "The mail," Harold said. "For the last 6 months, I have been getting to the mailbox before Janine. I saw things, notices, final warnings. I hid them in the garage because I did not know how to confront her. I just hoped she would fix it." He looked down at his hands, ashamed. "I was a coward. Harper, I let it happen." I picked up the first envelope. It was from a credit card company. Past due, immediate action required. I opened it. The balance was $42,000. I opened the next one, a personal loan provider. Default notice. And then, the third one, a letter from Mallory Wealth Solutions. It was not a bill. It was a statement for an account titled Janine Klein, High Yield Futures Fund. I scanned the activity. 6 months ago, Janine had deposited $80,000, likely a home equity line of credit she had taken out on their house without telling Harold. The statement showed aggressive, speculative trades, options, futures, high-risk gambles, and then the crash. The balance on the statement was negative, not zero, negative. She owed the brokerage she owed Trent over $60,000 in margin calls. The picture was clearing up. It was not just greed, it was desperation. "She invested with him," I whispered, looking at Harold. "He promised her she would get rich. He promised her she could be the matriarch who paid for everything. She wanted to be like Dorothy," Harold said sadly. "She wanted the power. And when she lost it all," I said, realizing the mechanism of the trap, "Trent did not foreclose on her. He offered her a way out." I could hear Trent's voice in my head, smooth and predatory. "Do not worry. Janine, we can wipe this debt away. We can fix the margin call. We just need to access some underutilized capital. Your mother's accounts are just sitting there." He had leveraged her debt to turn her into a thief. "Where is Caleb?" I asked suddenly. "On the porch," Harold said. I grabbed the stack of letters and walked out the back door. The night air was freezing, biting through my thin sweater. Caleb was sitting on the swing, the cherry of his cigarette glowing in the dark. "Caleb," I said. He flinched, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his boot. "I do not want a lecture. Harper." "I am not here to lecture you," I said. "I am here to show you how you were played." I tossed the letter from Mallory Wealth Solutions onto his lap. "What is this?" he asked, squinting in the dim porch light. "That is Mom's investment account," I said. "She lost everything. Caleb, she owes Trent Mallory more money than you make in 2 years. That is why she needed the $1 million. It was not a gift. It was a bailout." Caleb stared at the paper. "But she told me Grandma wanted us to have it. She sat me down and cried. She said Grandma was scared of the government taking it for taxes and wanted to give it to us early. She said it was our inheritance." "And you believed her because you wanted to," I said gently. "You wanted the beach house. You wanted the easy life." "I thought I was helping," Caleb whispered, his voice breaking. "She made me feel like I was protecting the family legacy. She said if we did not move the money, the nursing home would take it all." "And Nolan?" I asked. "Did he know?" Caleb shook his head vigorously. "No, God, no. Nolan is terrified of breaking rules. Mom asked for his social security number months ago. She said she was adding him to the life insurance policy as a beneficiary since we are getting married. He gave it to her because he trusts her." "She used it to open the burner account," I said. "She made him an accessory to a felony without him even knowing." Caleb put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was a messy, ugly sound, the sound of a man realizing his mother had sold him out to save her own skin. "Go inside," I told him. "Wake up Nolan. Tell him to get his own lawyer, not a family friend, a real criminal defense attorney. He is going to need it to prove he was a victim of identity theft and not a co-conspirator." Caleb nodded, wiping his face, and ran inside. I went back to the kitchen. I had the motive. I had the method. I had the fake signature. But as I scrolled through the bank records I had downloaded earlier, not just the wire transfer, but the detailed monthly statements, I noticed something else. The $1 million was the finale, but the show had started long before that. I filtered the transaction history for the last 18 months. I was looking for small, recurring payments that might have slipped under the radar. I found a pattern. Starting a year and a half ago, there were monthly checks written from Dorothy's account for amounts ranging from $2,000 to $3,000. The memo lines were always innocent medical transport, home health aid, physical therapy copay. The payee was a company called Senior Care Logistics. I ran the name. It was a registered LLC, but it had no website, no reviews. The address was a UPS store in Raleigh. I cross-referenced the dates of the checks with my own calendar. I had a shared family calendar where Mom would post updates about Grandma's appointments. June 12th. Mom taking Grandma to eye doctor. Check cleared June 13th. $300 to Senior Care Logistics. August 4th. Mom taking Grandma to heart specialist. Check cleared August 5th. $450 to Senior Care Logistics. I felt a wave of nausea. Janine had been charging her own mother for the rides she gave her. She had set up a fake vendor to bill Dorothy for the time and gas of being a daughter, and likely inflating the costs by 500%. I printed the list of transactions. I walked up the stairs, my legs feeling heavy. I knocked on Dorothy's door. "Come in," she said. Her voice was weak. I entered. She was sitting up in bed, still wearing her blue dress, staring at the wall. "Grandma," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I found something else, and it is going to hurt." I showed her the list. I explained the fake company. I explained that every time Janine had driven her to the doctor, every time she had picked up a prescription, she had written herself a check from Dorothy's account to pay for it. Dorothy took the paper. She put on her reading glasses. She ran her finger down the list of dates. "August 4th, she whispered. "We stopped for ice cream after the doctor. I bought her a sundae. I told her how grateful I was that she took the time off work to drive me. She looked up at me, and her eyes were dry, but the pain in them was infinite. She charged me for the ride. Harper. She turned my gratitude into an invoice. She has been bleeding you dry for 18 months, I said. The $1 million was just the final harvest. This was the daily tax. Dorothy crumpled the paper in her hand. I trusted her. I thought she did it because she loved me. She might love you, I said, though the words tasted like ash, but she loves the money more. Or maybe she is just so deep in the hole with Trent that she stopped seeing you as a mother and started seeing you as an ATM. Dorothy took a deep breath. She smoothed out the crumpled paper and placed it on the nightstand. Get the file, Harper, she said. Put it all together, the checks, the fake signature, the email from the TV, everything. I am, I said. I have enough now for a RICO case. We have wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. I stood up to leave, to go back to my laptop and finalize the timeline for the authorities. But as I passed the desk in the corner of the room, the desk where Janine had helped with the paperwork, I saw a tablet. It was an old iPad that Janine had given Grandma to play solitaire on. It was pinging with a notification. I glanced at the screen. It was synced to the family calendar, the one Janine managed. A reminder had just popped up for tomorrow morning, December 26th, 8:30 a.m. Emergency hearing. Competency guardianship. I froze. I tapped the notification to open the details. There was an attachment, a PDF of a court filing. I opened it. It was a petition filed by Janine Klein, with an affidavit signed by who else? Trent Mallory, acting as a concerned financial advisor. The petition claimed that Dorothy Klein was suffering from advanced dementia, was making reckless financial decisions citing the imaginary $1 million, and was being manipulated by an estranged granddaughter from out of state. It requested an emergency ex parte order granting Janine Klein immediate, temporary guardianship over Dorothy's person and estate. If the judge signed this tomorrow morning, everything I had done would be undone. Janine would have legal authority to override the bank freeze. She would have legal authority to ban me from the house. She would have legal authority to sign the closing documents for the beach house on Dorothy's behalf. Harper, Dorothy asked, seeing my face. What is it? I turned to her, the blood draining from my face. They are not just going to the escrow office tomorrow, I said. They are going to court. Court. They filed for guardianship. Grandma, I said, my voice shaking with fury. They are going to tell a judge that you are insane. They are going to tell a judge that I am manipulating you, and if they win, by noon tomorrow, Janine will own you. She will own your house, your money, and your freedom. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. We have 5 hours, I said. We have 5 hours to prepare for the fight of our lives. We are not going to the escrow office. We are going to that hearing. I grabbed the iPad. Get dressed. Grandma, I said. We have a war to win. The sun had not yet risen when I pulled my rental car out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly on the gravel, beside me. Grandma Dorothy sat in the passenger seat, clutching her purse with white-knuckled intensity. She was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and trousers, an outfit she usually reserved for board meetings at the Charity League. Today, she was wearing it to fight for her life. We were not going to the escrow office. We were headed to the law offices of Vance Sterling, a firm specializing in elder law that I had found through a frantic search of the state bar directory at 4 a.m. Mr. Vance, a man with a voice like gravel and a reputation for being a bulldog, had agreed to meet us at 6:30 a.m. after I sent him the digital dossier I had compiled. You look tired. Harper, Dorothy said, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. I am running on caffeine and spite, I replied. How are you holding up? I am angry, she said, and anger is a much better fuel than sadness. We met Vance in his office, a room that smelled of old leather and expensive cologne. He was a short, stout man who listened to our story without blinking. When I showed him the fraudulent guardianship petition Janine had filed, his face darkened. They are trying to ambush you, Vance said, slamming a file folder shut. They filed an ex parte motion. That means they want the judge to grant temporary guardianship without you being there to contest it. They are banking on the fact that you are an out-of-town relative and that Dorothy is too frail to appear. She is not frail, I said. Then let us go prove it, Vance said. I know Judge Patterson. He does not like being used as a weapon in family feuds. We arrived at the new Hanover County Courthouse just as the doors were unlocking. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 8:30 in chambers. We were there at 8, when Janine walked in 10 minutes later, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he had been hired from a billboard advertisement. She stopped dead in her tracks. She was wearing a soft pastel cardigan and no makeup, clearly curated to look like the exhausted, caring daughter. But when she saw Dorothy sitting upright on the bench next to me, her carefully constructed mask of martyrdom slipped. "Mother," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I am here to tell the truth." "Janine," Dorothy said coldly, "you should be in bed." Janine hissed, stepping forward. "You are confused. Harper, what have you done? You are parading her around like a prop." "Save it for the judge," I said. The hearing was held in a small wood-paneled conference room. Judge Patterson sat at the head of the table, reviewing the petition Janine had filed. He looked over his reading glasses at the assembly. This petition claims that Mrs. Klein is suffering from severe cognitive decline and is in imminent danger of financial ruin due to the influence of a granddaughter, the judge summarized. He looked at Janine. "Ms. Klein, you are asking for immediate control over all assets." "Yes, Your Honor," Janine said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "It breaks my heart to do this. My mother is not herself. She hallucinates large sums of money. She thinks she has $1 million to give away. My daughter, Harper, arrived yesterday and has been feeding these delusions, trying to get access to accounts that simply do not exist. I just want to protect my mother. I want to make sure she has a roof over her head." She wiped a tear from her eye. It was a compelling performance. If I did not know she had $40,000 in credit card debt and a pending real estate closing at 9 o'clock, I might have believed her. "I see," the judge said. He turned to Dorothy. "Mrs. Klein, your daughter says you are confused about your finances. Do you know what day it is?" Vance, our lawyer, started to object. But Dorothy raised her hand. "It is Friday, December 26th, Judge," Dorothy said clearly. "It is the day after Christmas, and I'm not confused about my finances. I know exactly how much money I have, or rather, how much I had until December 11th. "And how much was that?" the judge asked. "I had $1,240,000 in liquid assets, spread across a municipal bond ladder and a high-yield savings account," Dorothy recited. "I wired $1 million of that to a joint account with my granddaughter 2 weeks ago because I discovered my daughter was charging me $300 every time she drove me to the pharmacy." Janine gasped. "That is a lie. She is making it up." "I have the bank records, Your Honor," Vance said, sliding a thick binder across the table. "We also have evidence of a pattern of unauthorized transfers disguised as vendor payments to a shell company controlled by the petitioner." The judge opened the binder. He flipped through the pages I had prepared the timeline, the fake senior care logistics checks, and the email from the TV screen. "This is extensive," the judge muttered. "Your Honor," Janine's lawyer interrupted. "These are fabrications created by the granddaughter. She works in risk management. She knows how to manipulate documents." Suddenly, the door to the conference room opened. We all turned. Nolan Sutter walked in. He looked like he had not slept in a week. He was pale, unshaven, and he was not alone. He was accompanied by a severe-looking woman in a black suit. "Who are you?" the judge asked, annoyed. "I am representing Mr. Nolan Sutter," the woman said. "We are here to file an affidavit regarding the account mentioned in these proceedings." Janine stood up. "Nolan, what are you doing? Go home." Nolan did not look at her. He looked at the judge. "I did not open that account," Nolan said, his voice shaking but audible. "The one with the $900,000 in it. I have proof." His lawyer handed a document to the judge. "Your Honor, This is a sworn statement from the credit union. The account was opened using Mr. Sutter's social security number, but the address listed is a PSO box that Mr. Sutter has never rented. Furthermore, the signature card on file does not match Mr. Sutter's driver's license. We have a handwriting expert's preliminary analysis confirming it is a forgery. The judge looked at the document, then at Janine. Ms. Klein, the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Did you open an account in your future son-in-law's name without his permission? It was a family arrangement, Janine stammered, sweat breaking out on her forehead. Nolan knew. He is just scared because Harper threatened him. I did not know, Nolan said, his voice gaining strength. You asked for my social for the life insurance. You stole my identity. Janine looked frantically around the room. Her eyes landed on Caleb, who was sitting in the back corner, trying to make himself invisible. Caleb, she cried. Tell them we did this for Grandma. Caleb looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at his mother, then he looked at me. He saw the way I was holding Grandma's hand. He saw the way Nolan was looking at him with absolute disgust. Caleb stood up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I cannot do it, Mom, he whispered. Caleb, do not say a word. Janine's lawyer warned. Caleb ignored him. He walked up to the judge's table and placed his phone down. Read the texts, Caleb said, from last night and from last week. The judge picked up the phone. Who is Trent? The judge asked. He is her financial advisor, Caleb said, his voice breaking. He told us what to do. He told Mom to get the power of attorney signed. Even if she had to trick Grandma, he told me to call Harper and tell her not to come home. He texted me last night and said, Caleb took a shuddering breath. He said to give Grandma the blue pills so she would be asleep and could not talk to Harper. The room went silent. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was a conspiracy. He also said, Caleb continued, tears streaming down his face, that if we did not get the house closed by today, he would foreclose on Mom's debt and take everything we own. Janine sank into her chair, burying her face in her hands. It was over. The narrative she had built, the caring daughter, the senile mother, the greedy granddaughter, had been dismantled brick by brick. Trent Mallory, the judge read from the screen. Is that the man's name? Yes, I said. Trent Mallory of Mallory Wealth Solutions. Mr. Vance spoke up. Your Honor, my office ran a quick background check on Mr. Mallory this morning. It appears he is currently named as a defendant in 3 other civil suits in neighboring counties. The pattern is identical. He targets families in distress, offers to restructure their assets, and drains the accounts through unnecessary real estate transactions where he takes a massive commission. He is a predator, Dorothy said, her voice cutting through the legal jargon. And I was supposed to be his retirement fund. The judge took off his glasses. He looked at Janine with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Ms. Klein, I am denying your petition for guardianship with prejudice. Furthermore, I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order preventing you from accessing any accounts bearing Dorothy Klein's name. I am also ordering an emergency freeze on the assets of the Cape Fear Evergreen LLC and the account at the credit union. He turned to the bailiff. Contact the district attorney's office. I want a fraud investigator here within the hour, and get me the address for this Mallory Wealth Solutions. He is at the escrow office, Janine whispered. She looked up, her face streaked with mascara. He is waiting for me at Coastal Title. We were supposed to sign at 9. I checked my watch. It was 8:55. He is waiting for the money, I said. The judge slammed his gavel. Court is adjourned. But nobody leaves this room until the sheriff arrives, except for the victim and her counsel. As we walked out of the conference room, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was an alert from my banking app, the one linked to the joint account I shared with Grandma, but it was not a deposit. I stopped in the hallway, pulling out my phone. It was a notification from the bank's fraud department, but it was forwarded with a high-priority flag. Alert pending transaction. Origin coastal title. Escrow trust account. Destination Mallory Offshore Holdings, Cayman. Amount $999, $700. Status pending. Authorization required. My blood ran cold. The money was not in the credit union account anymore. Trent had already moved it to the escrow account in anticipation of the closing. And now, realizing that Janine was not coming, realizing that the house of cards was falling, he was trying to bypass the real estate deal entirely. He was trying to wire the funds straight from the escrow account to an offshore shell company. He was cutting and running. "What is it?" Vance asked, seeing my face. "He is not waiting for the closing," I said, showing him the screen. "He is trying to steal the principal right now. He has access to the escrow account." "The judge just ordered a freeze," Vance said. "The freeze takes hours to propagate through the banking system," I said. "Especially for a wire transfer that is already queued. He just needs one final authorization to release the hold." "Whose authorization?" Dorothy asked. "The buyer," I said. "Janine?" But Janine was in the courtroom, detained by the bailiff. Then I remembered the photocopy, the one with the pasted signature. He does not need Janine, I realized, feeling a sick dread in my stomach. He has Grandma's signature. He has the forged consent form. If he presents that to the escrow officer, they will think Grandma authorized the release of funds back to him as the investment manager. I looked at Dorothy. "He is at the escrow office right now," I said. "He is going to walk in there, hand them a piece of paper with your stolen signature on it, and walk out with $1 million before the police even get into their squad cars." "Then we have to stop him," Dorothy said. She tightened her grip on her purse. "Drive. Harper, drive fast." We ran to the car. The courthouse was only 10 minutes away from the escrow office. But in the world of wire transfers, 10 minutes was an eternity. The money was sitting in a digital purgatory, hovering between recovery and total loss. Trent was greedy. That was his weakness. He could have run an hour ago when Janine didn't show up, but he couldn't leave the $1 million behind. He was gambling that he could sign one last paper and disappear before the system caught up to him. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot. The final confrontation wasn't going to be in a courtroom. It was going to be across a desk covered in closing papers, with the ghost of $1 million hanging in the balance. The glass doors of Coastal Title Escrow slid open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded far too polite for the violence we were about to inflict. I walked in first. Flanked by Mr. Vance and Grandma Dorothy, the lobby was a sterile expanse of white marble and abstract art, the kind of place designed to make the transfer of massive wealth feel clinical and boring. But at the reception desk, the energy was anything but calm. Trent Mallory was standing there. He was leaning over the high counter, his camel hair coat unbuttoned, pointing a manicured finger at a document on the desk. He was speaking low and fast to a young woman who looked like she was about to cry. "Stop the wire," I shouted, my voice echoing off the glass walls. Trent spun around. For a split second, I saw the raw, animal panic in his eyes before he smoothed his face into that terrifyingly perfect mask of professional concern. "Harper," he said, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "And Dorothy, I am glad you are here. I was just finalizing the reversal. I wanted to make sure the funds were returned to the management account before the legal confusion set in." He was lying. I could see the screen behind the receptionist. The transfer destination was still listed as Mallory Offshore Holdings. Mr. Vance stepped forward, holding the court order like a weapon. "We have a temporary restraining order and an asset freeze issued by Judge Patterson 40 minutes ago. If you touch that keyboard, young lady, you will be an accessory to federal wire fraud." The receptionist snatched her hands away from the computer as if the keys were red hot. Trent laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. "This is ridiculous. I have a signed authorization right here." Dorothy signed it. "It allows me to move funds for asset protection purposes." He waved the document, the one with the photocopied signature, in the air. Dorothy walked up to him. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace that made her look 10 feet tall. "Let me see it," she said. Trent hesitated. then handed her the paper. "See your signature, dated December 1st. Dorothy looked at the paper. Then she looked at the receptionist. "My name is Dorothy Klein, and I want to see the security log for December 1st. Trent stiffened. "What I want to see the camera footage," Dorothy commanded, her voice ringing out like a bell. "If I came in here and signed this document in front of a notary as you claim, then I will be on the tape. Pull it up. Now." The receptionist looked at Trent, then at Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance nodded. "Do it. Or explain to the sheriff why you deleted evidence." The young woman typed frantically. A moment later, she turned the monitor so we could all see. Date December 1st. Time 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The video feed was grainy, but the faces were clear. The door opened. Trent Mallory walked in. He was guiding a woman by the elbow. It was not Dorothy. It was Janine. She was wearing a scarf wrapped around her head and large sunglasses, trying to look inconspicuous, but there was no mistaking her nervous, jerky movements. I watched as the on-screen Janine sat down. I watched as Trent slid a piece of paper across the desk. I watched as Janine hesitated, her hand shaking. Before she signed it, "That is not me," Dorothy said, pointing at the screen. "That is my daughter, and she is forging my name while you stand there and supervise." The front doors slid open again. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies walked in, followed closely by the bailiff from the courthouse who was escorting Janine. She was not in cuffs yet, but she looked like a broken woman. Her face was streaked with tears. Her posture collapsed. When she saw the video paused on the screen, the frozen image of her crime, she let out a sob that sounded like something tearing. "I had to," Janine screamed, her voice cracking. "He made me." Trent backed away toward the wall. "Janine, shut up. Do not say another word. He told me he would take the house," Janine cried. Turning to Dorothy, she pointed a shaking finger at Trent. "He showed me the loan papers. He said he had a lien on our house. He said if I did not get control of your money by the end of the year, he would foreclose and throw Harold and me on the street. He said it was the only way to save the family. I did no such thing." Trent scoffed, adjusting his cuffs. "I merely advised you on your options. You wrote the script," Janine yelled. "You told me to wear the scarf. You told me to cut the notary stamp off the photocopy. You told me to drug her dinner." The deputies moved in. They did not go for Janine. They went for Trent. "Sir, put your hands behind your back," the lead deputy said. "Wait," a voice called out from the doorway. It was Caleb. He had driven here separately, desperate to intervene. He ran into the lobby, breathless. "It was me," Caleb shouted. Stepping between Trent and the police, "I did it. I set up the accounts. I signed the papers. Leave them alone. Take me." I looked at my brother. He was shaking, terrified, but trying to do the one thing he thought a man was supposed to do, protect his mother. It was a noble, stupid gesture. "Caleb, stop," I said, grabbing his arm. "No, I did it," Caleb insisted. The deputy looked at Caleb, then looked at the stack of evidence Mr. Vance was holding. "Son, we have text messages from this man's phone to yours, giving you step-by-step instructions on how to gaslight your grandmother. We have IP logs showing the accounts were accessed from his office. You are not the mastermind. You are just a pawn. Step aside." Caleb sagged, the fight draining out of him. He looked at Janine, who was weeping silently now. He had tried to save her, but the truth was too heavy to lift. The deputies cuffed Trent. For the first time, his composure shattered. "You cannot do this," he shouted as they dragged him toward the door. "I have rights. That signature is valid. She owes me that money. It is my commission." His voice faded as the squad car doors slammed shut outside. The lobby fell silent. The receptionist was typing furiously, presumably reversing the wire transfer before she lost her job. Janine was sitting on a bench, her head in her hands, while a deputy read her rights. She would face charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy. She would likely serve time, or at the very least, spend years on probation. The beach house was gone. Her reputation was gone, but the money was safe. The manager of the title company came out, sweating profusely. "Mrs. Klein," he said, his voice trembling, I have just confirmed the recall of the wire. The $999,700 is being returned to your primary account as we speak. We are terribly sorry for this oversight." Dorothy did not look at him. She was looking at the empty doorway where Trent had been taken away. Then she turned to me. There was a look in her eyes I had not seen before. It was not relief. It was a profound, weary satisfaction. "You asked me a question at dinner." "Harper," she said softly. I looked at her. "What question?" "You asked me if I was sure I had sent the money." She said, "You thought I was confused. You thought I had been tricked into sending it and then forgetting." I nodded. "I thought they had gaslit you into believing you had done it." Dorothy smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I did send it. Harper. I sent it knowing full well that Janine had compromised my account. I sent it knowing that Trent was watching the balance like a hawk." I stared at her. "Why? Why would you send $1 million if you knew they were going to steal it?" "Because I needed them to commit the crime," she said. She walked over to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Janine was being led to a separate car. "I have known for months that Janine was stealing from me," Dorothy said. "The small checks, the fake vendors, but it was small enough that she could deny it. She could say it was for expenses. She could say I forgot. It was her word against mine. And who believes an 80-year-old woman over her devoted daughter?" She turned back to me. I knew Trent was pulling the strings. I knew they were planning something big. If I had confronted them with the small thefts, they would have just covered their tracks. They would have called me senile and gotten the guardianship anyway. I would have lost everything slowly, death by 1,000 cuts. She took a deep breath. So I gave them a target they could not resist. I wired the $1 million. I dangled the bait. I knew Trent would get greedy. I knew he would try to move it all at once. And I knew that to move that much money, they would have to leave a paper trail that not even the best lawyer could hide. I stood there, stunned. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The check for $500, the dinner, the confusion, the $500 check. I whispered, "You gave that to me." "To force the confrontation," Dorothy finished. "I knew that if I thanked you for $500 in front of them, after they had just stolen $1 million, they would panic. They would have to react. I needed them to turn on each other in public. I needed you to see it." She reached out and touched my cheek. "I am sorry I had to use you as the trigger, Harper, but you were the only one honest enough to ask the right questions." I looked at my grandmother with a new sense of awe. She had not been a victim. She had been the sting operator. She had risked her entire fortune on a single gamble that their greed would outweigh their caution, and she had won. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Janine pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of fraud in exchange for testifying against Trent. She avoided prison time, but received 5 years of probation and was ordered to pay restitution for the money she had stolen over the last 18 months. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. We did not speak much after that. Caleb was charged as an accessory but received community service and a suspended sentence. Given his cooperation and the evidence of manipulation, he broke up with the idea of the easy life and started working double shifts at a warehouse, trying to pay off his own debts. Nolan was cleared of all charges. He broke off the engagement with Caleb 2 weeks later. He changed his bank, his phone number, and as far as I know, he moved to a different state to restart his life away from the Klein drama. And Trent Mallory went to federal prison for 15 years, that evening, after the police statements were filed and the bank accounts were secured. I drove Dorothy back to the house on Chestnut Street. The Christmas tree was still lit, casting a warm glow on the empty living room. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea. The house was quiet. The tension was gone, replaced by the heavy silence of a family that had been pruned down to the healthy wood. I watched Dorothy sign a new stack of papers this time. Legit documents prepared by Mr. Vance. She was revoking the old power of attorney. She was placing her assets into an irrevocable trust with an independent corporate trustee. She was ensuring that no one, not even family, could ever touch her security again. She put the pen down and looked at me. "You saved me." Harper, she said. No, Grandma, I said, shaking my head. You saved yourself. I just drove the car. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm. I did not give you that money to make you rich. Harper, she said, her blue eyes piercing through me. I did not send that wire transfer just to catch them. I sent it because I wanted you to have it, and once the dust settles, the trust will transfer it back to you, properly this time. I do not need it. Grandma. I said, take it, she insisted. Not for the luxury, but for the leverage. I gave it to you so you never have to stay in a room you do not want to be in. I gave it to you so you are never dependent on someone who might lie to you. She squeezed my hand. I gave it to you so you can be free from those who see family as a wallet. I squeezed back. I left Wilmington that night. I did not stay for the rest of the holiday. There was nothing left to celebrate, and everything left to rebuild. I drove to the airport under a sky full of cold, bright stars. I sat in the terminal, watching the planes take off, feeling the weight of the check in my pocket. Not the fake $500 one, but the promise of the future. I had won. But it was not the kind of victory that made you want to cheer. It was the kind of victory that made you stand up straighter, breathe a little deeper, and walk through the security gate without looking back. The truth had been called by its name. The debt had been paid, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Harper and Dorothy's plan. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.